So once upon a time, back in the day when videos were still a relatively new thing on the internet, or at least it was a relatively new thing that I had a computer that was strong enough to play them as a starving grad student, there was a grainy black and white video that was making its way around the internet of a crow trying to get something that it wanted out of a bottle. I don't remember what the object was, but the crow had tried and failed to retrieve the object with its beak, because the bottle was designed by scientists so that the crow's head actually couldn't get down into it. You know, scientists, what are you going to do? So the crow took a wire, and after experimenting a little bit, it kind of carefully bent the wire and then took it in its beak and fished the object out of the bottle and took off with it. The whole video was maybe 50 seconds long tops, and it blew my mind. Because this was a bird blatantly using tools to get what it wanted. Tools. Now, I went to high school and college back in the day when learned books still defined humans as the animal that uses tools. And birds were still considered canonically unintelligent as animals, hence the insult bird brain. And here was a bird, of all things, using tools, actually engineering tools in order to problem solve. And I was astounded, which shows you how ignorant I was. Because, of course, we now know that birds are wicked smart in general, and crows use tools to problem solve literally all the time. And if you go on YouTube now, you can find videos of Caledonia crows like shaping and using hooks. You can find them like dropping pebbles into a jar of water to like float up an object that they want. You can see a 2-minute video of a crow that is tearing a piece of paper like just the right size and shape to fit into a vending machine that scientists have created that spits out little crow pellets of food. And I'm thinking back to my own experiences before debit card readers of like with the crumpled dollar bill from your pocket, you know, trying to get the Pepsi machine to just take it already. The crow was way ahead of me. And it's not just crows. The New York Times in September reported on the discovery of a Kia parrot named Bruce, who had learned to make a prosthetic beak for himself. You see, Bruce was missing the top half of his beak. They think maybe it had gotten injured in a trap designed for rats, actually. And this is a significant problem because Kia parrots use that part of their beak, the top part, to groom their feathers. And grooming not only gets rid of dirt and stuff, it gets rid of parasites. So it's like life and death for a Kia parrot to be able to groom itself properly. But Bruce didn't have the top half of his beak. So he had discovered how to make a prosthetic beak for himself by finding a pebble that was just exactly pretty much the same size and shape as what he had lost, and then kind of anchoring it between his tongue and his bottom beak, and then he would use the stone to clean his feathers. And no other Kia bird has ever been observed to do this. Bruce just figured it out for himself. So much is contained in that simple phrase, figured it out for himself. What does that mean for a bird or for any animal? Philosopher Thomas Nagel famously wondered, what is it like to be a bat? Meaning, what do bats experience subjectively from their own point of view? I was once watching this little bird like flit about on a beach, and it would like hop over here, stop, stand a little bit, and then it would hop over there. And I got really engrossed in it, watching this bird kind of traverse the entire beach, randomly hopping, and I'm wondering what's going on in its head when it suddenly is like, you know what, I'm done here, I think I'm gonna head over there. Like, what is that? What's going on in my dog's head when she gets up, walks forward 3 paces, and then lies back down? But then even more so, what on earth is it like for a crow to work its way around to tearing and crafting a piece of paper to just exactly the right size to insert into a vending machine to get food? What's it like for Bruce the parrot when he finds that pebble that is just the right size for grooming? Now, canonically, science would argue and has argued that it may not be like much of anything to be that bird. It may be like nothing at all. Humans have a strong tendency to anthropomorphize animals, right? To see them as like a little fuzzy or furry or scaly people and analogize their experiences in human terms. And we have a strong tendency to ascribe minds and mental states to the things we're interacting with. It's something that humans do. And so scientists are skeptical, like they're instinctively skeptical of our tendency to want to think of animals as being like us. And the reality is that animals and plants and all kinds of living systems and non-living systems can be intelligent, can make complex decisions without needing to have any kind of inward experience or conscious experience at all. So just to give an example from the human realm, there's a case of a woman who suffered a certain kind of neurological damage that rendered her blind from the perspective of her own experience, right? All she could experience was sort of indistinct patches of color. However, scientists discovered that she could still navigate her environment in surprising ways. This is described in a book called Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness, which we're going to return to. So scientists surmise, studying this woman, that the brain must do some kind of like basic visual processing that is like pre-aware. It bypasses the conscious mind. You don't need to know about it or think about it to do it, just like you don't need to know about it or think about it to make your heart beat. And so this woman could walk right around objects that were in her path. The scientists could give her pieces of paper and ask her to like tilt it and put it through a slot that was tilted at different angles. She could do all these things without any awareness that she was doing it. From her perspective, she was blind. So she knew how to do these things, but she didn't know that she knew how to do it. And so for a long time, scientists thought maybe animals are like that, right? They're skeptical that animals had basic sentience, let alone self-awareness. Self-awareness was thought to be a function of language and the fact that humans have this uniquely large cerebral cortex, right? And now increasingly science is pushing right back on that idea as we understand that animals are much more intelligent than we thought, much more complex than we thought, and much more aware than we had ever supposed. Take the mirror test, for example. In 2005, Happy, an elephant who lives in the Bronx Zoo, became the first elephant to pass the mirror test. That means scientists painted like a white X on Happy's forehead and then allowed Happy to see herself, an image of herself in a mirror with the X. And when Happy saw the image of herself, she repeatedly did what you or I would do, right? Took her trunk and felt around and noticed the X and inspected it. Happy understood that the elephant in the mirror was herself, right? And in so doing, Happy joined a small, idiosyncratic but growing list of animals who passed the mirror test, including chimpanzees, dolphins, possibly 2 magpies. And what does this mean, right? If an animal can recognize itself in a mirror, can understand that it is, does that mean it possesses self-awareness? Does that mean it experiences its own inner states in some way analogous to human self-consciousness? We don't know. And most animals, the vast majority of animals, can't do it. They don't recognize themselves in a mirror, no matter how often they are presented with it. Take crows again. Crows recognize faces. They can count to 6, sometimes higher. They can do addition and subtraction. What they don't seem to be able to do is recognize themselves in a mirror. At least they haven't yet. But birds in general, even the smartest birds, generally fail the mirror test. But now a new study suggests that crows may indeed possess self-awareness, something analogous to human self-awareness. The experiment's a little too complicated to recount here, but it required the crow to basically refer back to one of its own earlier conclusions in a train of problem solving. So in order to do what the scientists were asking it to do, the crow had to realize something and then know that it had realized something and then make another decision based on that. It had to know that it knows. And this is especially interesting to see in a bird because birds don't have the cerebral cortex, which is thought to house the human machinery of self-awareness. So the crow, if it is getting it done, was getting it done in an entirely different way with an entirely separate set of brain hardware. One more thought experiment about crows. Scientists studied the way a raven in an enclosure did or did not take effort to conceal its own stash of food from rival birds, right? So This bird is in an enclosure. It's got some food. There's other enclosures around it with other birds in it. And scientists put a peephole in the enclosure so that the crow could learn that if it looked through this peephole, it could see the other birds and see their food. And then they played like a recording sound as though there were birds that might be looking in on it. And what they discovered is that if the peephole was closed, the crow didn't worry about it. But if the peephole was open, then the crow would do everything it could to like hide its food from the prying gaze of those other imaginary birds. So what that means is the bird had abstracted from its own experience to that of another hypothetical bird, right? It had learned that it could see other birds' stashes through the peephole and deduced that that meant that other birds could do the same thing. It could take the perspective of another raven experiencing the world. So increasingly, scientists are asking, maybe looking in a mirror is just a lousy way of asking an animal if it is self-aware. Maybe we're just asking the wrong question. In July of 2012, a group of neuroscientists at Cambridge University signed what's called the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, in which, after reviewing everything that science now knows about the biological basis of consciousness, concluded, the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including mammals and birds, many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates. So let's talk about octopuses, right? Our current reigning favorite intelligent animal who's become famous for its complicated mind due to documentaries like My Octopus Teacher, which if you haven't seen it, it's fabulous. I think it's on Netflix. Don't quote me on that. In the book Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness, author Peter Godfrey Smith explains that what makes octopuses so interesting to study in captivity is not their problem-solving ability or other usual measures of intelligence, right? Octopuses do okay at solving problems, but the author says they're not Einsteins of the animal world. What makes them interesting is their individual capriciousness and level of awareness and personality. One student of octopuses said, when you work with a fish, they have no idea that they're in a tank. With octopuses, it is totally different. They know that they are inside this special place and that you are outside of it. And all their behaviors are affected by this awareness of their captivity and this relationship between the experimenter and the octopus. And so octopuses mess with the experimenters. They recognize them, they know who they are, even if they're all wearing identical uniforms. They play favorites. If they don't like them, they wait until they turn around and they squirt water down their backs. They like blow out lights in the tanks by squirting water at them, or they plug up the outflow valves to flood the laboratory. One octopus, which was being given a particularly sort of substandard form of food, waited until it had the full attention of its trainer and then kind of deliberately marched on down, carrying the piece of food and like threw it away. Octopuses in general are masters at waiting until their captor is occupied and then busting out of confinement and crawling away across the floor. They've even been observed at play, given plastic objects that are not food, and they still sort of spend the day bouncing them around with jets of water, making them do interesting things. Now, there are other animals in our lives that do similar things or even more complex things, but we are talking about a mollusk here, right? To see this kind of behavior in an invertebrate is to acknowledge that intelligence and complexity and even maybe personality runs deep in the animal world in ways that we are just beginning to understand. And personality is a loaded word to use with animals because, again, it's very anthropomorphizing, but anyone who spent any time with animals knows they have incredibly individual personalities, right? We know this. And for some animal rights advocates, the question has become, at what point does personality plus awareness equal personhood? When do animals become not people exactly, but persons? So for much of history, animals were and are instruments. They're tools. They're investments. They're the food we eat. They're how we get things done. Even if there are laws around how animals can and can't be treated, they're still understood as a category of property. But some are arguing now that for more sophisticated animals, for chimps, orangutans, dolphins, whales, elephants, some birds, octopuses, these things are too sentient, too aware, too personable not to be persons. And so there is actually a lawsuit currently underway arguing that Happy the elephant, remember Happy the elephant in the Bronx Zoo, should be granted personhood status and freed from the zoo. The activists claim that Happy is actually not so happy living alone in the enclosure, that Happy is quite depressed, and they want her transferred to a wild habitat where she can sort of romp free with other elephants. And to give the other side of it, the Bronx zookeepers argue that Happy is in fact happy, likes having her own space, doesn't want to hang with other elephants, and these activists just don't know Happy like they do, right? But setting aside the specifics of this case, lawsuits around animal personhood have become an increasingly common strategy by which animal rights organizations can get better treatment for animals. There have been lawsuits on behalf of chimpanzees, orcas, and now Happy the elephant. And in India, Pakistan, and Argentina, there have been cases in which animals were recognized as having some degree of fundamental inherent worth and dignity. As sentient beings, right? They are acknowledged as having some form of rights. But it is very rare for non-human animals to be accorded rights. It has not happened in the United States, ever. What would it mean for Happy to be declared a person? Well, it would be a big deal. It would not mean, as one skeptical judge asked, that Happy could vote. It would mean that Happy would be afforded an inherent worth and dignity not found in the category of property, and so would need to be treated differently. Happy's happiness and well-being would become a consideration in its own right, with its own weight, irrespective of what people wanted or did not want. Now, of course, for a human to deduce if an element is happy is not a simple thing, right? Like, how do we know if Happy is really happy? And so again, whatever animal experience is like, it is very different from human experience. And more so the further we get away from our own species, right? So it's important to allow animals their own idiosyncratic animalness. And critics of the argument for animal personhood say that ethically, it's beside the point. It's almost a distraction. Crows do not need to be like humans in order to be worthy of respect as part of the interdependent web of life. A rat does not need to exclaim, "Oh, woe is me," in this kind of inner soliloquy for its suffering to count as suffering. Right? Animals should not need to be persons for humans to treat them with humanity. So not a lot of people are familiar with this, I think, but this actually touches on a great piece of Unitarian history, which I'm going to share with you. It's the last thing we'll talk about today. I have occasionally remarked that if you look at almost any progressive movement in American history, you will find a Unitarian somewhere at the forefront. And it turns out animal rights, no exception. In the mid-19th century, animal cruelty was casual. It was endemic to society. And one day, a man named Henry Bergh observed a coach driver beating a tired horse with a whip, and he had an awakening. And there's no other word for it. There was nothing to motivate Henry Bergh personally to suddenly devote his life's work to animals. But that's what he did. It became his life's work to protect animals just because he was moved with compassion. And he became a tireless advocate for animal welfare in New York. He had learned of the work of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which had existed in England since 1824. And so he founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in 1866. And his minister, Henry Bellows of what is now All Souls, New York, became the vice president of the Animal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, American Society. And they succeeded in getting New York to pass the first laws for the protection of animals in America, right? These laws provided for the humane treatment of horses, of livestock, even animals being prepared and shipped for food. They took on dogfighting. They took on bull baiting. Because of their reforms, clay pigeons replaced the use of live birds in sport shooting. New York even deputized members of Berg's society to hand out citations enforcing these laws. So Berg has a story of going up to a guy who's whipping a horse, and he says, I hate to tell you this, but you can't do that anymore. You have to provide for this horse's happiness. And the guy was like, what, are you kidding me? So Berg was considered the great meddler, he was called. People did not take kindly to this. He was ridiculed. He received death threats. The idea that people had to actually care about the feelings of animals was considered lunacy. But he persisted. And he was criticized for focusing on animals when so many humans suffer, which is a criticism of animal rights movements that is still heard today. And Berg replied that if animals had to await mercy until all human affairs were resolved, they'd still be waiting at the second coming. But as it happens, Berg did not focus solely on animal welfare. In 1874, he created the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And he was also responsible for the first laws in America shielding children from abuse. It's an irony, I don't know what you want to call it, that children first received protection from abuse in America by analogizing them to horses. The horses' rights came first, and then children. So in this case, compassion for animals expanded the circle of compassion to other vulnerable beings. Compassion begets compassion. So today there's a group within our faith called the Unitarian Universalist Animal Ministry that is carrying this idea forward. The UUAM is a group of concerned Unitarian Universalists and friends who desire to express their faith through their compassion towards all beings, they say. UUAM chapters work to promote compassion for animals at the local level. And UUI is right now exploring starting up its own chapter of the UU Animal Ministry. You can see the latest e-blast for more information on how to be a part of that. Our relationships with animals are deep and complex. Animal lives are intimately intertwined with our own lives. And rethinking those relationships, rethinking how we are in relationship, would have far-reaching consequences. We'll continue to explore questions about our relationship to animals and the natural world in the next 2 sermons and then throughout the year and beyond, right? This is not a small thing. This is one of the central questions of our faith. Unitarian Universalism is a religion about relationship. And so we will turn again and again to the question, how am I in relationship? How am I in relationship with other humans, with other beings, with the spirit of life working in me and through me? And our faith calls us to root those relationships in curiosity, in compassion, and in wonder. With our animal kin, then, may we begin again with questioning, with noticing, with humility, and find our way back to reverence for all creatures, great and small, for life in all its glory. Blessed be, and amen.